Wonder Woman very much. I'm going to talk about that. Yeah, I know. I'm going to talk about that in another episode at some length with another friend of mine. But anyway, what did grab my interest and what made me excited to see was the review of the new Hulu series coming that adapts the Marvel series Runaways. Yeah. And that's a series that came out while we were in college. I've read a lot of it, and I love it. It is a really, really great series that gets into some sort of interesting corners of the Marvel universe. And from all accounts, it looks like this TV series is going to be really faithful to the tone and spirit of that. It'll obviously expand a lot of stuff that wasn't necessarily there on the page, but it seems like a good entry into the Marvel TV canon at this point. For those who might not know about Runaways a lot, as you mentioned earlier off mic, it was written by Brian K. Vaughan at the beginning, and he's responsible for a lot of stuff that is very, very highly praised in geek culture, like Y: The Last Man, and now the ongoing series Saga, which unfortunately I haven't read any of yet. But Aaron, you say you're mostly up on that at this point.
Yeah, I think there's a volume or two I haven't read. But I will say this. I came to Saga knowing nothing. I knew who Brian K. Vaughan was, and I got into it, and I love the story of Saga. It's very much a kind of literally, star-crossed lovers, Romeo and Juliet, warring planets kind of story, and I love that about it, and I really love the world building, but I was not prepared for the fact that there is quite a bit of what I would call HBO-level content in the series that by the time I because I bought like the first 3 volumes, and I read all 3, and I was like, great story. I don't know about some of this content. Some of it's a little bit too much. But it's one of those things where I love the story enough that I've done my best to kind of stay up on the story and where it's going, and try to kind of relegate the stuff that I don't like, that I don't necessarily agree with, to a dark corner as best I can. like we were just saying, a lot of times if there's things we don't agree with, we like to, it's easy to dismiss things out of hand. And with Saga, I'm trying really hard to not do that, and to see kind of where things go, and judge it on the merits of the story, and not necessarily, because it's very much, if they were ever to adapt it into a television show, which might be tough to do, it would have to be on, HBO or Showtime or something. There's no way.
So what came out of New York Comic Con that really grabbed you, Aaron?
Well, believe it or not, I'm really looking forward to Justice League.
Okay.
I had somebody ask me just yesterday, a friend of mine, asked me the question, the very pointed question that we all know can go a lot of different places. Welty, are you Marvel or are you DC?
Right.
Like, one of the, that's the question that's right up there with, Star Wars or Star Trek.
Right.
And I looked at him and I said, yes. And he was just like, wait, you're both? I said, sure, I'm both, because there are things about both, that I like. And so even though I would clearly be in the camp that says that as far as the MCU is going, as far as the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going, Marvel's doing it so much better than DC could ever dream at this point.
Yeah.
DC generally does it better these days in animation and small screen and that kind of thing. But I've wanted a Justice League live-action adaptation since I was watching, the Batman and Superman animated shows in
Right.
the 90s
Yeah.
as, a 10, 11, 12-year-old into my teens. And then you talked about how Runaways came out when we were in college together. That's also when the Justice League cartoon that I absolutely love was airing on Cartoon Network, which is a lot of... Go ahead.
And shortly after that, I think it was about 2006 or 7 probably, they were pretty close to getting a Justice League movie off the ground, and then there was the big Screenwriters Guild strike that kind of torpedoed the whole thing.
Yep, they actually, George Miller was going to direct it.
Right.
And which, seems like an unconventional choice because George Miller is the guy who does things like Happy Feet and Mad Max. But the more and more...
Hold on. You say that like those are things that would those are things that would naturally go together. Like that was just it was kind of a funny thing. Like, he does things like Happy Feet and Mad Max. Like, what are things like Happy Feet and Mad Max? Like,
well, Mad Max on the one hand, Road Warrior and Thunderdome and Fury Road, but he's also done animated features like Happy Feet, and it's like, okay, and then
so Justice League kind of is in the middle.
It was kind of this happy medium, I guess.
Yeah.
And the more and more I read about kind of what they wanted to do and who was cast in certain roles, I thought, you know what? There's part of me that would have loved to have seen that Justice League movie.
That would have been really interesting, because as I recall, I think they were looking at Armie Hammer for Batman, right?
Either Armie, I think they might have been looking at either Armie Hammer for Batman or Superman, and like DJ Caruso or maybe for Batman.
Maybe.
It was those two, because one of them I think ended up playing Flint in one of the G.I. Joe movies. I think the second one.
But then, they were going to do the Jon Stewart Green Lantern, and that was going to be Common, right?
I think so. That sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would have loved to have seen that story. I mean, I wouldn't mind if they decided to somehow resurrect that and turn that into an animated feature. I think
at this point that animated feature is basically called the Justice League animated series.
I mean, maybe depending on what they wanted to do in terms of story. But so I love the Justice League cartoon. I love the Cadmus arc that starts in season 2 and extends through the end of season 4 into Justice League Unlimited. Yeah. I mean, my ideal Justice League movie or like Justice League trilogy would be them attempting to adapt that animated Cadmus arc in some way.
See, I totally missed the Justice League cartoons because I was living in northeastern Europe at the time, and that wasn't available over there.
That's a bummer, because that is man, that series is good.
Well, now that I have a 7-year-old, maybe I'll have an excuse to dig that up on Netflix or whatever and watch that with him.
I think you should. I mean, the thing is that with that Cadmus arc in particular, when you go back and you listen to some of the guys behind it who helped to make it about dealing with that particular arc, because of the time that it kind of came out and it was being made, when we were freshmen, sophomores, juniors in college, think about the things that were going on in the world back then, going back into Iraq and things like that.
Yeah.
They essentially made a fantastic cartoon that grappled with some of those themes and some of those ideas and the idea of what happens if these superheroes go rogue. What do we do to protect America? What do we do to protect the Earth? And then you have individuals like Lex Luthor and Amanda Waller from Checkmate and Argus and Cadmus and things like that, kind of work together to create this group of kind of government-sponsored superheroes, a la the Minutemen from Watchmen and the Incredible, the Incredibles before they're the Incredibles before they have to go underground at the beginning of the film, and kind of just see how this arc and this story plays out. My favorite scene in probably the whole story arc is Waller and Lex are having dinner, and Lex is in the middle of running for president of the United States, and they're talking about what happens if he wins, and he just looks right at Amanda Waller across the table and says, "Do you realize how much power I would have to give up if I actually became president of the United States?" He goes on and says, "I'm just running a $70 million presidential campaign just to tick off Superman." I was like, that is Lex Luthor. Yeah. I mean, come on.
So speaking of the DCEU and Lex Luthor, like for my money, the best Lex Luthor character in the DCEU is Bruce Wayne in Batman vs Superman.
Yeah.
Because his stated reason for being anti-Superman is exactly the kind of thing that Lex Luthor would say.
Right. No, you're right. Yeah. Woo.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, we're going pretty long here. Why don't we go ahead and move on? Because I want to talk a little bit about Iron Man 2 with you before we have to wrap this up.
Okay. Yep.
So, just a couple of because as we're talking about these films in the different episodes, I'm talking a little bit about the background for each of these films, and something that happened in between Iron Man 1 and 2, a significant shift was that they got rid of Terrence Howard and replaced him with Don Cheadle. And the circumstances surrounding that are still not really clear, but there's a lot of speculation that had some to do at least with how much Jon Favreau disliked working with Terrence Howard. Yeah, that's
not one that I had heard. I always kind of thought it was at least to a great degree, it was a money dispute, and Terrence Howard just wanted a ton of money, and they were just like, nope, sorry.
Yeah, Terrence Howard was actually the highest paid actor on the first Iron Man film.
I think that's probably a part of why that would lead into, a pay dispute on the second one. So.
But whatever the reason was, honestly, I am very glad that change was made, because I think that Don Cheadle is an immeasurably better roadie than Terrence Howard was. It's hard for me to take Terrence Howard seriously a lot of the times, just because I kind of find I don't like his voice. And I know maybe that's kind of a petty surface thing, but that just sort of takes me out of it. And I understand objectively that he's a very fine actor, and he's done things that are critically acclaimed, and that's great. He just doesn't really work for me.
And that's okay. I mean, Terrence Howard as Rhodey is not what makes the first Iron Man great.
It definitely is not.
And
yeah. So obviously there's a lot of things you can gripe about in terms of Iron Man 2, but what were the things, because you just rewatched it and I've watched it recently too, what were the things that stood out to you and that you thought were really cool in Iron Man 2?
Well, I love the fact that we finally get to hang out with Rhodey as War Machine. Right?
Yes.
Because even with the first Iron Man, there's that scene with Rhodey, back when it was Terrence Howard, and he kind of looks at the other suit, and he's like, "Next time," and it's coming, and so I appreciate that they kind of followed through on that, and you get to see it, and but I think the things, and you're right, you can gripe about a lot of things, about Iron Man 2, and I think the best way to look at Iron Man 2 is that on its